Different is the U.S. from other Western democracies in this regard? To discuss these questions, we're joined in the studio by John Fortier. He is the director of the Democracy Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Simon Marks is the president and chief correspondent at Feature Story News. Also with us, political commentator and journalist Bob Franken, a very distinguished panel. Bob, before we get to the money in politics, let's talk about the state of the race right now. And as Jim mentioned, we've got some front runners out there. What do you make of them?
Well, the state of the race right now is on the Democratic side. You suddenly have a story that people really didn't expect. As Jim pointed out, the presumptive nominee, the one who is the front runner, is Hillary Clinton, the former First Lady under President Bill Clinton. That was 20 years ago or so. But now she is being challenged because, quite frankly, she's run a very, very poor campaign. And she's been dogged by issues that go to her credibility, that kind of thing. So you now have Joe Biden, the vice president, very seriously considering getting in the race. The key decision would be, does he think that Hillary is so weak that he would have a chance coming in this late? And on the Republican side, I can encapsulate that two words: Donald Trump. He is the story right now. He is a worldwide figure. I'm sure that our international audience will recognize his name. And he has been able to take that and start from nothing and suddenly become the leading Republican candidate, and one who, when he goes on television, always commands the ratings. So if he doesn't make it in the presidential race, he can always go back to doing his television shows.
John, the one name that we're hearing about as well is Bernie Sanders on the Democrat side, making a strong challenge against Hillary Clinton. What do you make of that candidacy? I mean, why are people attracted to Bernie Sanders? And also, what do you make of Trump?
Well, I think we knew that Hillary would have a challenger. Nobody gets the nomination without some sort of fight. And where that challenge was going to come from was from the left. People were going to say she was too hawkish on foreign policy, not interested enough in inequality, and somebody was going to make that argument. It might have been a stronger challenge from somebody like Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, but we were left with Bernie Sanders, an independent Democratic senator from Vermont, who is getting a fair amount of attention. I don't think he's the best candidate for that vessel, for that message, but still he is getting large crowds and gets some attention on the left against Hillary Clinton. As mentioned, Joe Biden and others, there's still something of a vacuum on the Democratic side, room for someone else to get in. Donald Trump, I think, really has jumped up ahead of the field against expectations. It's his fame, it's his outspokenness, it's the fact that it's a large Republican field. If you are a Republican who's worried about Donald Trump, I think there are some lessons of history that might make his long-term prospects more difficult, that he did not, you don't often have somebody, or almost never have somebody who's never been elected to office there before as president. And you've had people like this fail, people like Howard Dean or even Ross Perot as an independent, who are popular for quite a long time, and then there's a reconsideration. But for now, he is the story. He's the leader, and the others seem small by comparison.
He certainly is the story. Simon, is there any interest in this election at this very early stage outside the United States? I just got back from South Africa. You know, everybody's question was, is Donald Trump going to become president?
Yeah, I just got back from London, where everybody's question was exactly the same. And now, of course, everyone's question is Joe Biden getting in? Look, I think that normally one would say at this stage of an American election campaign, there wouldn't be a vast amount of international interest. But certainly, given that we're in this amazing moment where all the conventional wisdom has had to be thrown out of the window, the conventional wisdom just a few weeks ago was that Hillary was going to romp to victory on the Democratic side. The conventional wisdom was that maybe Jeb Bush might be her opponent. There'd be quite an interesting discussion on the Republican side. Now Donald Trump eats up all the oxygen in the room. And the fact that you've got Donald Trump, this extraordinary effervescent personality that the world can latch onto, and Hillary Clinton, this damaged known personality, I think boosts the international attention that this is already getting.
So that would be your description of Donald Trump, effervescent?
That was a good start.
Well, Bob, let's look at the money in politics right now. I mean, the attraction that these candidates may be getting, maybe just, I guess some people put it down to incumbent fatigue. People are tired of business as usual. They're just making a statement right here, putting their support behind these candidates. Donald Trump has money, but ultimately, at the end of the day, is the president going to be decided by who has the most money?
Well, first of all, if I can put a little bit of history here. Will Rogers, who was an American comedian from the 30s and 40s, is famously said that we have the best government that money can buy. And that was true then, but it is really true now. And I think that the anger that you talked about, the disaffection that the American people have in business as usual, is partly based on the fact that they no longer believe that they are real participants in this so-called democracy. That would be the view that they have, that they are being basically locked out by a few rich people who are able to make their hundreds of millions of dollars in contributions, just a few of them, and control the electoral process and then control the legal system in the United States and the administration of the laws because they've put in their favored people into power. And I think that what we are seeing now with the Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side, you're seeing a rebellion against the established order. And what you're seeing with Donald Trump also is that kind of rebellion on the Republican side.
And John, when it comes to the money in politics, and we look at all these billionaires backing these candidates, as Bob points out, does it just cut out most of the country, disaffected, as Bob said? And of course, these billionaires don't donate this money out of civic goodness, do they? They want something in return. I think in most other countries, this would be called corruption.
Well, I think there is a good amount to worry about, yeah. But I guess on the whole of the system, the money is spread out in a lot of interesting ways. Your reporter described it quite well. A lot of the money, still the majority of money, is coming in relatively regulated and limited chunks of $2,700, $5,000. And while for a local race that may seem a lot, if you give $5,400 to a presidential candidate, you don't get to walk into the Oval Office or get any special treatment. But we have seen the rise of larger independent money, whether that's billionaires or outside groups. Sometimes we don't know who they are, and that's a feature of our politics that's relatively new. We've always had candidate spending, political parties. We knew where that money is coming from. Some of this other money is less regulated. We don't know where it's from. It's also less limited. You can give a lot. That being said, we don't have somebody like Jeb Bush, who's raised the most money. He's not raising all from billionaires. He's raising across the board. He's raising lots of money from lots of different categories. He's not dependent on one billionaire. We saw a few candidates last race on the Republican side who were really propped up by one person, keeping them going. I think you are seeing in some ways a maturing of the billionaires giving money, lots of them, to lots of different candidates, so that there's not one mastermind behind this. It's somewhat worrisome, but there is still a system that a lot of people are putting their money into.
Right. Simon, we heard those figures at the beginning of the show. What is it? Between $3 and $6 billion in this election. For the sake of comparison, what would it cost in a British election? Of course, you don't have the Prime Minister elected directly, but for the party to get a majority.
You just don't have this kind of money flowing through the pipes of a British general election. The idea that someone running to be a member of Parliament, parliamentary system, as you know, for a constituency in Cornwall, say, has to go out and raise $1 million in order to be able to wage that campaign is unknown. That's partly because there are very, very heavy restrictions on the amount of advertising that any candidate can engage in, and if you can't spend money on advertising, you don't need to raise money to spend on advertising. But it's also because there is, I think, a difference in the political tradition. You know, we're at a point in this country now where the quest for money is ceaseless. It's not simply a question of whether money can buy an election, and I think that's a dubious proposition. It's a fact that if you are an elected member of Congress, a president, if you are running for elective office and after you win it, you have to keep looking for money all the time. And that starts taking up so much of your attention inevitably is not therefore on the issues of policy that you were sent to Washington to legislate and discuss.
And this is sort of a self-feeding process. In Britain, for instance, the election is how long? 8 weeks?
Well, now it's a little longer, but not much longer than that.
So 10 weeks.
Yeah.
Here, it's 4 years.
Correct.
The moment that the last election is over, the next one starts. And part of that is because there's all this money coming in, and so all the people who are ambitious immediately start. The other thing is you don't have the advertising restrictions in the United States because of the traditions here that you have in Britain and other countries. And so the money, for the most part, goes to media. That is to say, television and, of course, social media and all that kind of thing. And they feed on each other. But the simple fact of the matter is that we have a constant political campaign going in this country, oftentimes to the detriment of running the country, the government running the country.
It's just worth making the point, and that where we are today, at this very moment, Joe Biden has to decide if he's going to run, right? But a crucial decision-making factor in that process is whether he can raise the money necessary to run. Now, I think everybody around the table would agree Joe Biden could be a potentially viable challenger for Hillary Clinton, but there's a possibility that the fact that he's left it so late to raise the money holds him back from getting in the race, and that's damaging to the democratic process.
John, if we look at the numbers, estimated costs for the next election, it's going to be almost double what the 2012 election is. Why are those costs rising so fast?
Well, partly it is an arms race that everyone raises, and you have a lot of candidates. But again, the money, as is indicated, is going a lot to television advertising. Right. And again, that's we have a lot of new techniques and micro-targeting and the internet, and this is all the wave of the future. But still, the vast majority of this money is being spent on relatively traditional television advertising, trying to get to voters who, frankly, are not paying attention. Some of it is that the people's lives don't revolve around politics, and to break through, to saturate them in key states with advertising takes money. So if you're a local television station, you're doing quite well in this system, but that's where most of the money is going.
Okay.